Hello and welcome to this week's Negotiation Nuggets. If you are watching live, thank you very much for being here. If you are watching back on the playback, thank you very much for watching. This week, I'm talking about who is in charge when it comes to your internal negotiations. I was talking to a friend this week that wanted to do some negotiation training, a senior leader in a business, and wanted to speak to HR about the possibility of doing some training for his team. Having come from a background, excuse me, let me move the dog out of the way. Having come from a background in retail, he's moved industries and could see that the new business that he's working in doesn't have the same level of negotiation experience, intelligence, or skill that he was seeking. So in this business, the conversation that he's having is that he wants to do negotiation training for his team. And when it comes to the allocation of budget, that actually sits with HR. And so he's done a whole heap of work around getting multiple different proposals, getting some quotes in, and has presented it to HR to ultimately evaluate the proposals to determine what is possible. And he said, well, what I've been told is that they're in the middle of allocating budgets for different trainings that they want to do in the organization. And therefore, I'll have to wait and see what I get allocated. It might be a little, it might be some more. I don't know if I'm going to have enough and whether the proposals I've got are cheap enough for what's needed, depending on my budget. And it got me thinking. I thought, well, this is really fascinating, isn't it? Firstly, what the question that came to mind was, who's in charge? Is it you or the HR leader that's making the decision around how much money you can have? And this is obviously common in organizations. You have various departments that hold budgets, and you have budget holders, and you have those that want to spend the budget. But when it comes to negotiation, if you want to succeed in negotiating, you really need to be in control of the process right from the outset, whether that's an internal negotiation or an external negotiation. We talk about it often from an external counterparty, but the majority of negotiations that individual leaders in corporates have on a daily basis are internally. So it's being in control and in charge of that process. And I thought to myself, well, it doesn't feel like you're in charge if you're waiting for a decision to come back from the HR business partner to say, here's your allocated amount. Now, firstly, what it sounds like is that it's here's all the options presented to the HR team, and the response is, well, let's see what they come back with. Hopefully we'll get what we want. Now, as we all know, hope isn't a strategy, and therefore, if we were to be in charge of the negotiations that we're having internally, is recognizing what needs to happen to take us to be in charge. First things first is we'd never leave it to chance. We never leave it to let's see what they come back with, because that's not being in charge. That's not being in control. So first question is, are you in charge? Recognize when it comes to an internal negotiation, you've got to determine who's in charge. Is it the other party? Is it you? And how can you be in charge of the process and how the other party responds to you? The second thing I wanted to say is, actually, have you identified you're in a negotiation? Because in this scenario, it sounds on the surface, it's, I'm just waiting for a budget allocation. And once I know what that budget is, I can then determine how it is spent. Now, what do you understand to be a negotiation? And if you look at the dictionary definition, it's about two parties coming together to reach an agreement. Now, internally, it is so easy to focus on having meetings that ultimately just get you outcomes, and you go, yep, great, I got the outcome that I wanted. And having meetings just to get to outcomes is one thing, but when you're actually recognizing that discussion, that dialogue, that back and forth of information sharing and gathering is actually a negotiation because you're looking to obtain an agreement, you need to start treating it like a negotiation, not just an everyday meeting that has an everyday outcome, because you've got a very specific goal that you're trying to achieve, and you need to employ various methods to influence the other party to get the outcome that you're seeking. Now, if you don't identify with being in a negotiation, it's unlikely, therefore, that you're going to plan appropriately for that negotiation. And as I looked into this scenario and heard what was being shared, it made me think about the approach that the HR partner was potentially taking. Is it value distribution or is it value creation? When someone says, I'm looking just to split out a budget, a budget suggests a fixed pie that is going to be sliced up and given to little morsels given to individuals in the team, or for individual projects or individual training opportunities. Now, when you're in a fixed pie negotiation, then it's all about value distribution. One party wins, another party loses. It's not about how can we grow the prize. And if that's what's happening internally, you're taking a value distributive approach to investment, then you're not really looking for where the opportunities are to create value, to maximize it, and to consider what else could be possible that can actually grow the amount of money we've got available. Now, if you're treating everything like a fixed budget, then clearly it's only ever going to be whatever small portion you've got that you get to allocate. But if you see that the opportunity to grow the amount of money that you've got to spend is there, you start looking at things differently and start looking for where those solutions are. So I found that fascinating, that it's an immediate acceptance of a value distributive approach and no internal focus on how do I have a conversation with this HR partner around how can we create value here, rather than just focus on distributing it, because that definitely just becomes a win-lose scenario. Now, when you recognize you're in a negotiation, you do different things than just going to meetings hoping you're going to get the outcome that you want. And the three key areas that you essentially focus on in a negotiation is, firstly, identifying what is needed to set the table for the negotiation. Then it's about designing the optimum solution that you want. What's the deal that you actually want to get? And then it's about the execution at the table. Now, too often, where people are focusing their energy and their efforts, even with internal negotiations, if they even know they're in one, is focused straight away on the execution at the table. What's the conversation I'm going to have? How much data have I gathered? How many pamphlets can I gather about the particular programs that I want to do, and get my 3 or more equivalent quotes, and then present my case for someone then else to make the decision. Now, if you were to think of it as a negotiation, would you make a sales pitch to your counterparty to get what you wanted in a negotiation? No, you wouldn't. You'd focus on going, okay, well, what are their interests? Do I know enough about them and what their objectives are and what their interests are in order to understand how I can influence them? Do I know what their decision-making parameters are and where their motivations and KPIs lie? Because if I again understand how they're measured, the way they're measured is going to influence the way they're making decisions. So how is HR measured? What are their interests? What were the factors that were going to be taken into consideration when making a budget allocation? And by recognizing that you've got to influence the other party through, first of all, setting the table, not just waiting to see what they come back with after you've made a sales pitch, you start operating very differently. Prior to saying, hey, I want to spend some money on negotiation training or whatever other training that is sought, you focus on getting as much information as you can about where the power lies. Where does the power lie in the relationship? Who has power? Does HR have all the power? Is there another interested party that has more power that can influence this? What could be the sequencing of conversations that need to be had? How can I gather information that can get me aware of whether or not they're in a value distributive mindset or a value creative mindset, and how can I influence them to create the opportunities that I want. So when you start to recognize you're in a negotiation, you don't wait until you are in the dialogue or at the table before you start planning. You certainly never go into an external negotiation saying, let's see what they come back with, because what you end up doing is reacting to the choices that the other party has made, or the proposals they've made, and then scrambling to find a way to put a counter together. Now, in an internal negotiation, it's no different. If you're waiting for your HR partner or finance or another party within the business that holds the budget to make a decision, you are waiting and transferring the power over to them. It doesn't leave you in charge. So bring your planning up front before you make the ask. Think about exactly what you're doing to set the table so that by the time you're at the execution phase having a conversation, you've already influenced the situation, fed the right information to the right parties to understand the interests of the other parties, and have already got them into a mindset of where you can close a negotiation, not just a meeting with an outcome, with the outcome that you seek. So recognize this. I'm just going to summarize those points as I'm coming over 11 minutes now. Is recognize who's in charge when it comes to your internal negotiations. Is it you? Is it them? Because you certainly want to be in charge. And if you want to be in charge, you need to start thinking about how you're setting the table before you actually get to the table. Identify where the power sits. Identify where the opportunities are for you to influence that shift of power so that you can start setting the table in your favor. Design the optimum deal. Recognize if you're in where it's value distributive and you need it to be value creative, because internally it's a long-term relationship that you've got and you want to maintain that relationship beyond one transaction. So you certainly don't want to come across aggressively and demanding and throwing your toys out the pram. You want to maintain the relationship as well as getting the best out of the transaction. So think about what you need to shift the perspective internally about creating value versus distributing value. How can you start trading things that are important from one side to the other side so that the overall prize available in the business is bigger? And then recognize that you are in a negotiation. If you are having a conversation to reach an agreement, you are in a negotiation. Don't let yourself be lured into a false sense of I'm at a meeting where I'm just hoping to get an outcome. Hope is not a strategy. We have to influence the outcomes that we're seeking in order to get the best result, not just for us, but for the business if you're focusing on value creation. And finally, recognize that if you want to succeed in negotiation, you've got to start early. Plan your approach, plan how you think the other party is going to respond, plan how you're going to counter that response, and make sure that the way you've set the table actually supports your execution of the result when you are actually in the dialogue of negotiation. So when it comes to who's in charge, when it comes to your internal negotiations, please make sure that it's you. Have a great week, and if you've got any questions, feel free to hit me up at thevaluenegotiator.com. Send me a message. You can put comments on here or send me a message, and I will be sure to respond. So thanks very much for listening, and I look forward to checking in with you again for the next negotiation nugget in a week's time. Thanks.